Good morning, guys. We are back at our quest of trying to make the perfect cheddar cheese for slicing and grating, and we are going to try a new recipe today. This is found on newenglandcheesemaking.com. It's also where my other recipe is from. I just wanted to try something a little bit different today and see how that texture works out. I have made a cheddar not that long ago that we just opened up in a couple videos ago, and it was really tasty and tasted very much like cheddar, but the texture is still off. So I am trying something a little bit different today, and that includes waxing my cheddar instead of a cloth binding or using a natural rind sort of aging process, and we will see if that can help keep the moisture in. I don't have a large enough pot to actually hold 4 gallons of milk, so I go ahead and do this in my roaster. I haven't had any issues with it. It's easy to control the temperature still, and it actually keeps it warm for the whole culturing process and cooking process. So let's go over some of the things you're going to need in order to make a cheddar cheese. The first of which is some calcium chloride, and this is only if you are using store-bought milk. The pasteurization process does something to some of the bonds in the milk that don't make them as strong. So if you want to get a nice firm set on your milk, you need to add some calcium chloride, which just helps the whole process. If you want your cheddar to be an orange cheddar, you're going to need some Annatto coloring. You don't have to add it. It doesn't really add any flavoring as far as I understand. It's simply to make it that nice orange cheddary look to it. You also need some sort of culture. For this recipe, it is C201, which is a thermophilic culture. It means it likes the heat, which we will be using on this throughout the whole process, and we will actually be cooking it for a period of time to help these cultures work and develop flavor. As far as tools go, you will need something large enough to hold either the 2 gallons of milk or 4 gallons of milk like I'm doing today. And a couple optional tools is like a cheese ladle or some sort of spoon that will allow you to stir your curds around. This is technically a curd cutter, but you could use a very long knife if you wanted to. You will also need a thermometer of some sort in order to check the temperature of your cheese. And then lastly, you will need a way to press your cheese. I have a small, simple press here. It is a spring tension press, basically. There are springs that go onto this, and it causes it to push down and gives us the pressures that we need. There are a couple designs for like a Dutch press, which is where you leverage it basically with weight on the other end. And you can also just simply put weights on it. Like, it doesn't have to be fancy if you don't want it to be. I started out with just using a flat board and like cans of chicken and tuna to put on top of my spacer here, and using weights from my weight set or from wherever I could find them, books, and putting them on there until I had the right weight to press my cheese. Anything that is going into the cheese, such as your thermometer, the actual pot that your cheese is going into, and the utensils you are using, along with your press and the cheesecloth that you will need, all should be sterilized prior to use. I boil anything that I can. Anything I can't boil, I will wipe down with a solution of vinegar and water. A couple other little things you will need are non-chlorinated water, some sort of measuring cup, and of course rennet, which will set your curd. This can come in tablet form or liquid form. I prefer the liquid form. It just dissolves a lot easier and is stirred in a lot easier, but you can use whatever you have available. And then you will also need some sort of salt. This needs to be a non-iodized salt. Anything that is chlorinated or iodized will kill off your culture, and you won't develop any flavor in your cheese. So a canning salt works fine for this. There are specialty cheese salts that you can buy depending on what you'd like to use. Kosher salt will also work as long as it's not iodized. So there are several options to go with, but think that's about it for everything that you will need, and we will come back when this has reached 88 degrees. While my milk is warming up, I am going to go ahead and add my calcium chloride. It has been added to a 1/4 cup of non-chlorinated water, and I'm just going to pour this in and mix it well, and then I'll be doing the same thing with our Annatto coloring. The recipe calls for 2 to 8 mils per 2 gallons. I am using 6 mils total for my 4-gallon batch. So my milk has reached 88 degrees, and I am going to go ahead and sprinkle over the culture packets and let them sit for about 5 minutes before stirring them through. And you want to sprinkle this over the surface. Don't dump it all in the same place. Just try and get a nice even so that it can all hydrate quickly and get to work. And I'll be back in 5 minutes. So I've let this rest for about 5 minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and stir it through, and then we're going to let this whole thing sit for 60 minutes covered and let the cultures get to work. So my culture has been working away for the last 60 minutes or so, and it is time to add our rennet. I have dissolved it into a 1/4 cup of water again. I'm going to put it into my milk here, stir very briefly for about 1 minute, and then let it sit for at least 30 minutes. Everyone recommends that you use an up and down motion when you are stirring in your rennet. I believe it helps keep the milk from moving so much as when you do a circular motion, and so it can become still again and let the rennet go ahead and coagulate in your milk. The temperature is still keeping at about 88 degrees, which is perfect. And we'll let this sit for 30 minutes and then we'll be back. So I let this sit for about 30 minutes and it wasn't quite ready when I tested it, so I let it sit for another 15 minutes or so, and I'm going to test it now and see if we get a nice split in our curds, and we're going to bring you down and show you that. So you go ahead and insert something in at about 45-degree angle, lift gently, and what you're looking for is a nice clean split up and down the length of the blade. So that means that this curd is ready to be cut, and that'll be our next step. So now that our curd has formed, we are going to go ahead and slice it into about 1/2 inch sections. And if you don't have a curd harp, which is something that does all of your horizontal lines for you, you can go into the batch diagonally and do it that way. So I'm just going to make cuts straight up and down, back and forth, and then I'll go in sideways like this through the whole curd and get the smaller horizontal sections. So now that our curds have been let to rest for about 5 minutes, we are going to cook our curds. So we need to get them up to about 102 degrees. And we're going to do this very slowly over a period of about 30 to 45 minutes. And I'll be stirring occasionally just so the heat evenly distributes, although the recipe doesn't technically say to stir them during this period. You want to be very gentle when you first start out. You don't want to break up your curds too much. The smaller your curds are when you start, the drier the cheese will be in the end. So we are going for a fairly moist cheese, or at least a cheddar cheese that is moist. So we are going to try and keep our curds a decent size through this process. And any really big curds, which are usually called whale curds, go ahead and break them up with the side of your spoon. So it's been about 40 minutes and we are at 102 degrees. And as you can see, a lot of the whey has already started to been released from the curds. Next part is the most tedious part. It is going to be about an hour of fairly frequent stirring. Every 15 minutes of that hour, I'm going to let the curds settle and take off about a pint of the whey. So our time is just about up here, and I'm just going to do a quick test to check on our curds, and that is to squeeze them in your hand firmly, and then if you blow them apart, as you can see, they all kind of hold together, but a gentle push against them breaks them all apart. And that should indicate that your curds are ready to go. So I'm going to let them set down here and kind of settle down to the bottom, and then I'll be draining them off into a cloth covered sieve, and then they'll come back into this pot and they will be salted. So I'm just draining off some of the top whey here just to make the pan a little bit easier to handle before pouring all of it into this sieve here. I just covered this up. We're going to let it rest for about 30 minutes, and the cloth will help keep the mass of the cheese warm while it continues to drain. So my curds have finished draining, and I've just put them back in the pot here. We are going to break them up a little bit and then put our salt on. We need about 2% salt by weight, and I'm going to do it in 2 batches. This may seem like a lot of salt, but a lot of it will drain off as your whey drains during the pressing process. So this is my press, and now we are just going to get all of our curds in here and make sure it gets all the way into the corners, and then we'll be pressing for 10 pounds of weight for the first hour. So I am taking my cheese out from its first press. As you can see, it kind of has consolidated quite a bit. That means that the curds are coming together well. I'm actually able to handle it. Not all cheese are like this, but this one is actually fairly well formed already, and that is very nice. This will actually go through 2 more different pressings. The second press will be at 25 pounds for 3 hours, and the third press will be at 50 pounds, which is pretty much the max that my little press can do, and that will be for 18 hours. And I will flip it halfway through that 18-hour time period. Usually this finishes up sometime in the evening for me, as far as getting it all made, and I will flip it first thing the next morning and let it finish out that 18-hour time. After I'm done with that, I will simply take it out of the mold and put it on a wire rack and place a clean, dry cheesecloth on top of it and let it air dry for several days, flipping frequently. It's been a couple of days since I pressed my cheese, and it has been sitting on my countertop covered with a cheesecloth on a wire rack, drying. I have just been waiting for the surface to become dry to the touch. You don't want it to be wet when you are going to try and wax your cheese. This will give it a really good, hopefully, base to stick to, as well as keep my cheese from getting too much mold on the inside. I did flip it about twice a day, usually morning and night, and for the most part it has turned out very well. It looks like my curds all came together beautifully, and I am very excited to try this cheese in about a month. I thought I would bring you guys along and show you the process of waxing. I've never done waxing before, so we're gonna be seeing how it goes. I don't have a natural bristle brush, which is something they recommend. I'm going to try and use this rubber one and see how it goes. If it doesn't go well, I'll have to run out to the store and grab a brush that would work better. And this part is fairly easy. You really just need some wax. I was gifted this for Christmas from my mother. She knows about my passion for cheese. So I am very excited to get to use this for the first time. And I will bring you guys a little bit closer to see the process. It's very simple. I'm going to go ahead and clean the surface of the cheese with a vinegar water mixture, and then I'll be waxing it with some warm wax. There's 2 different methods of waxing you can use. You can do a high heat wax or a low heat wax. I'm going with a low heat because I don't think I have enough to dip my wax in, which is something you do when you have your high heat. So I'm going to brush it on with a low heat wax. So you can see that the surface of this is nice and dry. It is still nice and springy, and I am hopeful this will be a very nice texture when we have aged it for a few weeks. This is an old pan. I am willing to sacrifice for the cause. You may have some trouble getting the wax out once you have melted it down. I'm going to try and get the wax into some other object to save for later, but this pan may be ruined, so keep that in mind when you're selecting something to melt your wax in. And just a reminder that wax does have a flash point, so keep a very close eye on your wax when you are melting it. Go slowly and make sure you are not risking open flames too close to your melting wax. Just turn this on low and let it melt, and then we'll be back. You can do this in a double broiler process, and I may, if I don't think I can control the heat very well, but so far I'm just kind of having the flame super low, taking it on and off, and just making sure it doesn't start to smoke. I think I have enough wax melted to brush on. So I'm going to go ahead and put this to the side and save it for another time, or if I need more, turn off the heat there. And then I'm going to clean the surface of my cheese with some vinegar and water. It's just kind of a dilute solution of vinegar. You want to try and make sure and keep your cheese surface super clean before you wax it, because if you do this low temperature method, it does not kill off any bacteria that is on the surface of your cheese. So you want to start with a nice clean surface and either use a brine, a saltwater brine, or a water and vinegar wash to brush off any mold or bacteria and inhibit any mold growth that you might get. This turned out a little bit oranger. I don't know if you can see that on the camera than I was expecting. I think next time I will use a little bit less of the Annatto or Annatto and get something that's a little less vibrant, although it is very pretty to look at. All right, I'm gonna let that air dry for a few minutes and then we'll get started on the wax. All right, I think we're ready to give this a shot. So the brush seems to be working okay. It may not be quite the same as if you did it with a natural brush, but working in small sections is turning out all right. I'm just trying to get a nice even coat all the way around and make sure to get into any divots or low areas. Make sure they're covered. We'll probably end up doing at least 2 layers of this, just to make sure everything is sealed in nicely. This is one of the traditional methods of aging your cheese. The other one is cloth binding, which I have tried. The cheese flavor turned out really well, but the texture was not exactly what I was hoping. So we're going to try this method and see if it has better results. That is one full layer done. I'm going to go ahead and melt some more wax and do a full second layer. So our giant baby bell is all done. I am going to go ahead and put it downstairs into my downstairs pantry for 4 to 6 weeks. I'll probably do the 4 weeks just because I want to see how it will do with a minimum amount of aging, and we'll come back and give it a try when it's ready. Hi guys! It has been 4 weeks since we made this cheese, and I'm going to go ahead and open it up today. I have a couple little things of note. It did really well for the first 3 weeks or so, and then within the last couple days it started getting some fracture points, specifically around the edges here on the very corners. There's a couple different reasons that could happen that I know of. Shaver suggested that it could have been because there were some holes already in the wax, and so the cheese dried out and got smaller, and the wax obviously can't contract with it in that way. The cheese could actually have expanded due to the cultures that are in it if they have released any air or pockets like you would get with like a Swiss type of cheese, which would be very unusual since that's not really the culture that you would use. And I also could have just not done a great job of reinforcing these corners. As you flip it, which I did every couple of days back and forth just to keep the gravity equal and make sure like all the moisture didn't settle onto one side, it could be that these points were just a stress point and just weaker than the rest of the areas that I covered with the wax. But we're going to crack it open and see how it tastes, see what the texture is like, and let you guys know. As far as I know, with wax, you can actually reuse this if you just heat it up and strain it through a strainer and get all the little bits out of it. I'll give it a try and let you know how it works out for me. It looks interesting. It is slightly moist inside, and there is a little ring of mold right here where one of the rim cracks was at. But otherwise, it's really not too bad so far as mold growing on the inside goes. It's probably the cleanest looking cheese I've had comparatively. It's just like unwrapping a giant baby bell. It's very squishy. I don't know if you guys can see, but it is definitely way softer than anything else really, or any of the other cheddars or medium to hard cheeses that I've made so far. Just slice down the middle. It's got an interesting texture.
Whoa, that's a lot of holes.
There's a lot of holes in there, which was what I kind of guessed, that there was some sort of development with the cultures where they were making gas pockets like you would see in Swiss, basically. Though I'm not sure how. That's a big old one there. In there. It's definitely a softer texture than we've had though.
Looks like you made Velveeta.
Homemade Velveeta. It's got a very interesting.
It's good. Mm-hmm. I'm just confused. It's like sandwich, like deli meat soft almost.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I'm going for. Not quite the processed. This is very close to almost processed texture.
Yeah, I think that's where my brain is subconsciously. I don't know about that.
So I almost went a little too far on the other side for soft. And I don't know what that's. It's got a lot of air pockets in it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Huh. I don't think it tastes quite as cheddary as the last one did.
did you not squeeze out I feel like you squeezed out the same amount of water you always do.
Yeah, no, this is all, so they would be much more...
Like fermentation pockets?
Yeah, they're fermentation pockets, because I think if I had failed to press them correctly, you wouldn't get these like very smooth, like air pockety type of, like these look like Swiss pockets basically, where they have that very smooth interior.
Yeah.
You get a lot. I've not pressed before, and I know what that looks like, and it looks much more irregular compared to this.
Yeah.
The texture is definitely closer to what I was going for. Not quite right, but
Yeah, it's pretty good. It kind of makes me wonder how this would fondue.
it'd probably do better than the other cheeses we have, just because it's a softer texture in the first place. I wonder if it melts well.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. If like the like melting temp would be low enough to just kind of double boiler it.
Yeah. That might be really good for like mac and cheese.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it, guys. Another experiment in cheese. We are getting one step closer once again. The texture is definitely closer to what I was hoping. It's actually on the other side of what I was wanting. It's just a little bit too soft, and obviously the air bubbles was not a outcome that I was predicting. I'll have to go back and take a look and see what might have caused that. I'm not entirely sure if it's just the type of culture that if you do it a certain way it makes this kind of product, and I missed a step or didn't do a step correctly, but it definitely made something that's edible. I did like having the wax all the way around it. Almost this entire thing is edible comparatively to the cloth bound and the natural rinds, where you have to cut off quite a bit of the outsides to get to the usable cheese. This is almost entirely usable except for a couple of the little bits around the edges where the mold especially is. So yeah, it was a fun experiment, and I hope this helped you guys if you guys are trying to learn how to make cheese, and I will let you guys know how my experiments continue. I'll probably make another one here soon. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you guys next time.